Hey, for Cammy?
Yeah.
Great.
Wow, looks like we're going far.
Yeah, that's okay, right?
Absolutely.
Hi, Michael. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Thanks very much for speaking to me, and congratulations on the movie. It was great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
So I was just speaking to Jordan and Max about the film now, so plenty of additional
Nice.
questions to ask you. So first of all, yeah, congratulations on the movie. I was really interested about where the whole idea came from, because it's not a traditional horror film in the sense that it's not like a traditional horror icon. And I was speaking to these two about how the fact that this horror icon isn't the typical slasher guy that comes with his knife and he comes killing. The way that he gets into these characters and then he gets through to us is by kind of creating this mistrust between these two characters. Can you tell a bit about where that inspiration came from?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of, you're right that it's not the most kind of classical horror, and I began more with the sort of human thriller element. I think that was the key, was that the first idea was the idea of a relationship between a rideshare driver and passenger. I mean, I've been just kind of intrigued by the social dynamics of rideshare since, since it began, right? And it's just sort of this new thing as a society. We're still sort of figuring out how we're supposed to behave in a rideshare. And at first it was sort of this notion, oh, you're going to be, it's so fun and you're going to be friends with the driver by the end of it. And then we kind of realized there was a darker side to that, right? And that there's elements of mistrust. Yeah. And even from the driver's perspective, that there might be an element of, can you trust your passenger? And I think so that dynamic, the idea of, you're putting your life into a stranger's hands, and then you're going to you're in this odd sort of new world, right? And you're barreling down a dark highway at night. So I started with that idea, and I wondered, could I write a whole movie that was about the relationship between those two people? And that was then, it felt sort of the right thing to put them into a situation where they had to battle against a shared threat. So you start out with them as this very awkward, intense relationship, and then they are required to to trust each other in order to face something, something that's out there in the dark. And that was when I've also just sort of always had an interest in the figure of kind of the highway robber, or sort of the highwayman. And in the Middle Ages, they were called gentlemen of the road. And I loved that phrase. That felt very evocative to me, of like this kind of dignified, quiet, polite front that's disguising this terrifying threat. And that was the influence of the Tollman. Was, he is kind of, he seems from afar just this kind of a man in white. And then the closer you look, the more you see how unearthly and otherworldly he is. I mean, he's very much in the tradition of the kind of Clive Barker cosmic horror, of course, influenced by Lovecraft. And so, and certainly we're joining a fairly crowded room at this point of these other kinds of horror icons that are, it's funny, and when I wrote it in 2017, I was really like, oh, we need to have more original horror characters. I love the original characters. And then now I worry that there's been such a glut that everybody sort of sees them, they're blurring together for people. But I think the Tollman, the key is he is part of this greater mythology, this world of the dark road at night, the shortcut through the woods, and the people waiting to ambush you. And, it's like, that's kind of, and so it's like, to me, there's more to even than just the Tollman. He's the part of this kind of mythology. But I love the original horror icons, and I kind of want more of them, because I feel like, as much as we love the kind of classic horror movies, there's just so much space to continue expanding genre. And so I'm excited for that to continue happening.
That's weird.
What?
I don't know. It was like my phone just had like an aneurysm or something.
Well, watch out!
It must have been quite a challenge to get your head around in the fact that when we come into the film, there's these two complete strangers and we know nothing about them. And usually we get this typical setup where all the characters that will usually kind of get killed off or whatever, we find out about them. And because we know about them, because we know their backstory, we feel for them. But this was exactly the other way around. It was like life in reverse, and we know these people, we know nothing about them, but we start finding things out, and that could have gone wrong, and we could have not really cared. But the exact opposite happened to me. I started to kind of really feel for these people. You must have been very conscious about that fact. And how did you try and navigate through that to make sure that we kind of feel for these people that come through these? I think we can talk about kind of flashback type scenes, not without spoiling it. How did you navigate that to make sure that we would feel to these people and kind of go into their story with them and not kind of lose track with all these new things that were thrown on us?
On some level, I think I was trusting the relatability of what it is to be a passenger in a car with a strange driver. And so I start with that. And I was sort of hoping that would at least get me through the first, that you would at least latch on to Cammy purely through her kind of relatability that she can be a cipher for the audience, at least at first. And then I think my preference is always to reveal character through action and to see how they interact with each other. And just to see, I think their behavior towards each other is just revealing of who they are as people. And I think that to me I wanted to approach it that way, as opposed to, there's little bits of backstory, but not much. And I certainly, with Spencer, it's an easy choice to keep him very unknown for most of the movie, because I want him to be, for us to really only see him through his moment-to-moment personality and the sort of shifts in his personality, because I think that's what I want to keep the audience on their toes about what's going on with him. And with Cammy, I think you're right. I certainly knew I wasn't giving the audience much to latch on to, but I was sort of trusting that she could be sort of this every woman character who is being revealed, and the strength of her character is being revealed as she's navigating this situation. And I like to kind of slowly peel back the layers of the character as I proceed through a movie. And to your other point, there is no kind of, it's the two of them for the whole movie. It's not a group that I'm going to kill off one by one.
Yeah.
And which is a blessing and a curse, because I can stick with the two of them and I don't have to sort of spend any time on the sort of like supporting characters that are going to be expendable. But then that means that I have to keep the audience tense and afraid, even though these are the two main characters, and it's hard to imagine one of them being killed off, right? So there's rarely a fear that the toll man's going to swoop in and kill one of them. Yeah. And so for that reason, you have to find ways in which to continue subverting expectations, continue sort of like changing to pull the rug out from under the audience repeatedly, so that it still has that experience of being this kind of thrill ride, even if it's not the functional horror structure of, okay, you're taking players off the board one by one.
Someone's coming.
You don't believe me now, but you will. You're someplace else. You're in his place.
Whose place?
The toll man.
And what about creating the hallucinations and the? I'm not sure how much it was a hallucination at the end and what wasn't. But how difficult was it to kind of recreate these scenes in the middle of the woods and kind of make it feel like some of it was the serious, the two of them talking, and there probably wasn't a hallucination, and the actual hallucinations itself? What was important for you to kind of create this distinction whilst keeping us kind of on our toes and not quite sure what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key stylistic element was sort of using a lot of stillness and silence. And using that as a huge contrast, sharp contrast with when something would explode in a hallucinatory scene, and it would get very sort of kinetic. And so there was sort of camera-wise, there were things we did in terms of sort of more fixed and more sort of smooth shots when it was more grounded, and getting things a little more handheld and a little crazier as the sort of psychological element starts to unravel and as their minds start to unravel. But also, I mean, I think it's really just a matter of, as long as we're grounded in the two of them as characters and understand that they're both real and they're both there and interacting with each other, then it felt a bit like everything else was just, it's kind of the whole movie. The approach was, there's their relationship and then there's what's outside of them. And so you can kind of, creating the claustrophobic world of the car, which is very grounded, had a similar kind of, there was a similar challenge there as there was to creating the kind of agoraphobic, too broad, too open world of the dark woods. It was a similar, it's all about, let's contextualize it within their relationship and within their dynamic.
Mm-hmm. And then also, obviously, the film is based around the tall man creating this mistrust. So I'm curious how you came about designing the look of the Toll Master to go with that idea that he wasn't a typical slasher that I mentioned earlier, but he came across as this menacing character despite not having a big machete in his hand or whatever.
Yes, and the key I think with him also was not showing him much. I mean, we really kind of hide him for most of the movie, and so that's on the one hand, that's letting the audience's imagination kind of fill in for them. And I think I can never do as well as an audience member can in terms of generating terror on the one hand. And on the other hand, it's like you want the Toll Man to be this kind of a balance between. I want him to be a bit uncanny. I want him to be almost kind of just a man in white. But then you look closer and you see he starts to kind of, the closer you look at him, the more things that are off about him. You start to see he's asymmetric and he has one hand is bigger than the other, and his facial features aren't actually facial features. And so it's kind of that is analogous, I think, in a way to the relationship of these two people and to them as characters, is we don't really see them very well at first, and they're these very kind of vague impressions of people. And then the closer we look, the closer we see the cracks in them and the truths that they're hiding. And so I think in that sense, I wanted him to feel like this kind of, he almost comes into focus throughout the course of the movie. He starts out very distant and very vague and just threatening in a sort of around the corner way. And then he gets closer and closer to us as the movie kind of proceeds toward the climax.
He's not like you and me. He's not a man at all. But he has his ways of getting what he wants. You're stuck on his road until he gets his toll.
You've created very much a lore of its own in this film, no? So I'm guessing that you've got ideas, or while you're writing, you've had certain ideas of where you could possibly take this if the film goes down well.
Yeah, definitely. I think any situation where you have a mythology, there's always the prospect of a franchise. I didn't go into it thinking of it as a franchise, but I went into it thinking of this is a world populated with, there's more than just the Toll Man. And certainly the Toll Man is beyond just this road and beyond this time. I mean, he was inspired so much by sort of like the past history of sort of the danger of travel. And so I think I see a lot of potential in going down that route. If that should be the case, yes.
And if that's the case, will that be something you'd like to do next, or have you got something else in mind that you'd like to kind of try first before?
Yeah, I have a couple other scripts that I'm excited about that I'm working on. I'm hoping that the release of the Toll I'll sort of be able to sort of settle on one and get that going. But I would also love to I'd love to write more of this world as well.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Michael. I wish you the best of luck with the film when it comes out at the end of the week. And I hope to speak to you sometime in the future about another one of these projects or the sequel to this one.
Sounds great.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. All the best. Cheers then. Bye.
What does he want?
Death.
Thank you.